Did you know another version of you exists somewhere else and may contact you at some point? While we hope your other version is not up to no good, some people still have trouble accepting parallel universes as a real thing. However, in this video, we bring you the top terrifying signals from parallel universes that scientists will never solve. How many universes are there? Some people find it comforting to believe there is a single one. However, the theory of parallel universes or multiple universes has gained support even from prominent scientists. Lending support are truly bizarre cases or experiences that people have had that suggest they did interact with whole other universes, even if briefly. What is perplexing is that science has not been able to explain these experiences in a satisfactory way that does not involve parallel universes. Our list of cases in this video where people have reported receiving signals from parallel universes will challenge everything you've been told about the universe. Some of them will make you question the reliability of your brain. And number one is a signal that is bewilderingly connected to a world-famous man, which sets it apart from the rest. This is the Mandela effect. Yes, the same iconic Nelson Mandela from South Africa. Mandela passed away in 2013 and the whole world observed the mourning and burial rites. However, some people claim to remember the iconic freedom fighter's life differently. Some people are convinced they can recollect Nelson Mandela dying in prison in South Africa in 1985. The nation mourned and his wife gave him a memorable eulogy. This was all on the news. To explain this seeming disparity in history, a paranormal researcher coined the term the Mandela effect. Some people believe the Mandela effect is evidence that we are truly living in an alternate reality and Mandela did die in the 80s in another universe. There are legions of true believers in this effect. You will find Reddit communities that discuss the subject that have over 200,000 members. There are websites, hashtags, and videos with millions of views. All these people incredibly remember things the same way. Enthusiasts call evidence of the effect's residue as if there was a timeline that has since been erased. We're only able to see the residual hints of what once was. Another popular theory associated with the Mandela effect is that CERN, the European Research Centre, caused a splinter in time and space when it fired up the Large Hadron Collider in 2008 and started flinging atoms at other atoms to discover the roots of the universe. Who knows what these scientists are up to in their little labs? And number two is the green children of Woolpit. You might have heard about the little green men coming to visit the world from civilizations far away from us in the universe. However, it seems we might have had the pleasure of hosting two of them on this planet thanks to parallel universes. This bizarre story takes us back to the 12th century when some reapers working in a field stumbled across two children in some ditches that were made to trap wolves at a place known as Woolpit. First, the workers did not expect to find children at this place, but more amazingly, the children's skin was tinged with a green hue. Their clothes were made from unfamiliar materials, and their speech was unintelligible to the reapers. The apparently lost children were taken to the village, where they were eventually accepted into the home of a local landowner, Sir Richard Decane at Wilkes. The children would not eat any food presented to them, even though they were hungry. Eventually, the villagers brought around recently harvested beans, which the children devoured. They survived only on beans for many months until they acquired a taste for bread. The boy fell sick and soon died, but the girl remained in good health and eventually lost her green skin. In time, she learned to speak English and later married a man at King's Lynn who turned out to be an ambassador of Henry II. After she learned how to speak English, she relayed the story of their origins, and this was where it got interesting. The girl said that she and her brother came from a strange underground land called the Land of St. Martin, where there was no sun. Like them, all the inhabitants of St. Martin's Land who lived underground were green. She described another, luminous land that could be seen across a river. The girl explained that she and her brother were tending their father's flock when they came upon a cave. On entering the cave, they wandered through the darkness for a long time until, following the sound of bells, they came out the other side, entering into bright sunlight, which they found startling. It was then that they were found by the Reapers, seemingly in another universe. Let's go to number 3, which is the story of the mysterious man from Taured. We go to Japan this time, but in the 1950s, where a man showed up at an airport. When asked by customs officials where he came from, the man simply replied, Taured. To this day, some people take this story as evidence of time travel or parallel universes. In case you're wondering what makes this story unusual, there is no country by the name of Taured, either today or during the 1950s. And the story ends with the man disappearing a day after arriving in Japan and leaving no trace. All of his personal documents, such as his passport and driver's license, also disappeared. It was a hot day when this man arrived at Haneda Airport, also known as Tokyo International Airport. He was described as Caucasian with a beard. Whilst his primary language is said to have been French, accounts claim that he spoke Japanese and many other languages as well. The man handed over his passport for stamping, and that was when the Japanese immigration officer noticed something strange. Whilst the passport looked authentic, the country where it was issued, Taured, was recognized as non-existent by both the officer and his colleagues. The man from Taured was therefore taken away for interrogation. According to the traveler, Taured was a place between France and Spain and had by then been in existence for 1,000 years. And when given a map, the man from Taured pointed to the area occupied by the Principality of Andorra and was surprised to see his country with a different name on the map. Both sides refused to give in. The Japanese officers insisted that Taured did not exist, and the traveler maintained otherwise. Whilst they conducted their investigation, they locked him up in a hotel room nearby with 2 guards stationed outside his room. The next morning, however, when the officers went to check on him, the man from Taured had mysteriously disappeared. How would you feel if you woke up one day and realized you were suddenly back with your ex and had a completely different job? That is the confusion of the lady at number 4 on our list. Lorena Garcia found herself in another dimension in 2008 when she woke up one morning. The then 41-year-old said the traumatic experience had her fearing people would think she was suffering from a psychotic episode. The first change was a very simple one. The sheets on her bed were different. This confused her, of course, but she didn't give it much thought. It was another change when she arrived at work later that day that caused her to truly question her reality. She found her office had changed, but a few checks confirmed to her it was her own. But it was now in another department, and she was reporting to a director she didn't know. Garcia asked for time off and visited a doctor who found nothing wrong with her, suggesting she was hallucinating as a result of stress, but she wasn't convinced. It would get worse when she realized she was suddenly with her ex-boyfriend again. Her current boyfriend just vanished. To convince herself, she hired a detective who found no trace of the boyfriend, even though she supplied her boyfriend's name, address, workplace, and even where he studied. Garcia also remembered her sister had surgery on her arm, but her family, the sister included, had no such memory. Could Garcia have somehow landed in a parallel universe where she went back in time? A highway in Seville. A man named Pedro Oliver Ramirez allegedly took one wrong turn that changed his entire life. Well, his dimension definitely did. This happened in Spain on November 9th, 1986. This is one of the most popular and widespread claims of interdimensional travel out there. Ramirez was driving along a typical route. He was on his way home to Alcalá de Guadaria from work in the city we know as Seville. He then realized he was passing through a very odd part of the road that he had never previously seen or paid attention to. An eerie 6-lane highway appeared before him, but he did not recognize it at all. On the side of this road, he spotted a tall building he had never seen before, despite the fact that he had been traveling on this route on a daily basis for a while now. During the first part of this route, everything had seemed normal, but as soon as he passed a curve, the surroundings entirely changed. He observed a plane about 100 meters away, and there were 5 or 6 industrial buildings there. Each one was around 8 meters tall and was fully illuminated. On the other side were residential buildings with about 20 plants each, and at the edge of the road was dense grass. After realizing the absolute change in his surroundings, he felt a sensation of heat invading his vehicle and started hearing a choir or distant voices. According to the tale, these voices told him that he had been transferred to a different hemisphere. He didn't know what to do and just kept driving until he came across an intersection having signs pointing in 3 different directions. He took one of the roads, assuming he was headed back towards Seville, but out of nowhere, his car came to a sudden halt. he looked out the window and saw that he was in front of his home. He was annoyed by what happened and decided to retrace his steps. While investigating, he realized that the usual route between his house and Seville took about half an hour, but that night it took him 3 hours and 5 minutes to get back home. His car had consumed fuel equivalent to 200 kilometers. Ramirez never managed to find his way back to the 6-lane highway, probably because it's an entirely different dimension, and the portal to that dimension is probably closed forever. And number 6 is the story of the woman that chanced upon a portal to another dimension in the stone forest in Peru. If you like camping, you might want to mind where you explore when you are spending time in the forest, or you may find yourself in a different universe. This is what happened to a group of women camping on a plateau named Marcahuasi in Peru. First off, this location is popular for its huge granite rocks that are thought to resemble human faces, animals, and religious symbols. Many have supposed that these shapes were created by pre-Columbian civilizations, but in fact, archaeologists have stated that the curious shapes of the rocks are naturally occurring. How creepy is that? Because of these strange stone formations, the area is sometimes called the Stone Forest. A doctor described treating an anonymous patient who became paralyzed after an encounter in the forest. She entered the ancient stone forest with some friends late at night and were lured by strange music to a small torch-lit cabin. Through the window of the cabin, they saw people dancing inside. She felt a sudden sensation of cold and decided to stick her head through an open door and noticed the people inside were dressed in 17th century fashion. She was quickly pulled back, but the half of her body that entered through the door became paralyzed. The doctor said after conducting many tests, he and his colleagues had to dismiss the case as an unknown affliction. The patient was prescribed regular physical therapy at Lima's National Hospital in the hope that it would help her paralysis without further attempting to explain the cause. The doctor claims partial entry of the woman into the anomalous zone to produce a change in the energy flow existing in her nervous system. It seems the woman experienced a time slip and the distortion led to a physical injury. Carol Chase McElhenney. Another peculiar account of interdimensional shift was narrated by a woman named Carol Chase McElhenney. Back in March 2006, she was driving from her home in San Bernardino to the sheepdog trials in Perris, California with her dog. Topping a hill, she noticed an exit sign to nearby Riverside. Her family had historic roots in the city dating back to the 1800s. Her grandparents were buried in the town's local cemetery. Her aunt and grandmother had homes there, and Carol herself had been a resident for a while after college. She thought it would be fun to visit old familiar places on her way. As soon as she had this thought, she suddenly smelled a whiff of cigar smoke in her car, especially after the smell reminded her of her grandfather who had passed away when she was a child. She planned to go to the cemetery. Carol drove to Paris, checked into a motel, and after the first sheepdog trial ended, nostalgia took over and dragged her back to Riverside. She stopped at the first cemetery, realizing something was out of place. She was unable to find her childhood home or the homes of her relatives. She didn't recognize any of the houses, but the numbers were still correct. The cemetery where her grandparents were buried was gone, and in its place was a fenced lot full of overgrown weed. She drove around trying to find anything familiar but had no luck. She did recognize the Riverside City College and Central Middle School, but when she reached the University Avenue, she saw some frightening-looking people and got out of there as fast as she could. Afterwards, she looked for Mission Inn and couldn't find it either. Carol thought she had landed in a different dimension in which the happy town of Riverside she grew up in was a shady little place. She drove to the street where her grandmother and aunt's house was, but both were gone. In place of her grandmother's large Tudor home with a towering eucalyptus in front, there were newer ranch-style homes with bushes in the neighborhood. Even the house Carol lived in was gone. The place looked run down with scary people and a whole lot of graffiti. Everything she knew was gone: the banks, restaurants, insurance companies, everything. She was afraid to stop and ask for directions, so after a couple of hours of roaming in Riverside, she went back to Paris, where things were totally normal. A few years later, when Carol's father died, she returned to Riverside for his funeral and found the town reverted back to normal, just like she knew it from childhood. Everything was back: her grandmother's home, her aunt's home, the Mission Inn, and the cemetery, and she never encountered the alternate version of her beloved town again. Some people won't do a thing until they can find scientists that support it. This is why number 8 is special, because it was supported by one of the most brilliant scientists ever. Stephen Hawking was a beloved, famous scientist who proposed many theories. One of them was that black holes are portals to other universes. Black holes are these terrifying objects in space that swallow everything they come in contact with. They are the legends nightmares are made from. However, if you are brave enough to explore, Hawking claims you will find yourself in an alternate universe if you jump into a black hole. Who knows, you might like it there. So instead of destroying everything that goes near them, we might not need to be so afraid of black holes, according to a paper he published with colleagues Andrew Strominger, a professor of physics at Harvard University, and Malcolm Perry, a professor of theoretical physics at Cambridge University. He said during a speech, "Black holes are not the eternal prisons they were once thought. If you feel you are trapped in a black hole, don't give up. There is a way out." That may sound like motivational words, but Hawking was saying you come out into a different universe at the other end. However, before you jump into a black hole, Hawking said you might not be able to find your way back from the alternate universe. It is a one-way trip. Why is that? Well, if it is possible to destroy information, then it's possible to speculate that the past might not exist at all. Black holes would be able to delete parts of the past, and as Hawking said, it's the past that tells us who we are. Without it, we lose our identity. So you will end up not knowing a thing about your past life, which will prevent you from coming back. Jofar Vorin of Laxaria. Back in 1851, a man was found roaming in a dazed state in Frankfurt an der Oder, a small German village. Reports suggested that he was just wandering around looking confused. When the local authorities questioned him, he managed to tell them in broken German that his name was Jofar, or maybe Joseph Vorin, and he was completely unaware of his whereabouts. He had no idea where he was at the time. He also claimed that he came to Germany looking for his brother, but somehow got caught up in a shipwreck in an unknown location. He kept insisting that the languages he was speaking were Laxarian and Abramian. He claimed to be a citizen of Laxaria, a place no one had heard of before as it didn't exist. Vorin allegedly explained to the authorities that Laxaria was located in a continent-like region of Ermt named Sakria, but no one besides Vorin knew of this place. He was also unable to retrace his trip to that point on a map. He explained that his religion was Christian in form and doctrine, but was called Ispatian. The Laxaria he spoke of was supposedly hundreds of miles from Europe, and there was a vast ocean separating the country from it. He didn't recognize the name of continents as we know them. He revealed more about his version of Earth and said that the Earth he knew was divided into 5 main regions named Sakria, Aflar, Aslar, Auslar, and Uplar. He fluently spoke 2 languages unknown to us. It is believed that he was transferred to Berlin for further investigation. However, some retellings claim that he threw himself out of the carriage in what looked like a hysterical fit and escaped on his way there. He was never seen again, just like the man from Taurad. There is no official record of how he looked or where he went. So was this all some kind of elaborate prank, or was there a glitch in the Matrix that brought Vorin to our version of the universe? No one can say for sure. And number 10 is the story of Gavin, a genius who apparently knew the secret of hopping between different time frames. This story was told by a Redditor about an event in his childhood. He claimed he was a fairly normal kid who spent a bit too much time on the computer though, and had friends among the nerdy and the popular. It all started when he met this nerdy kid called Gavin because of a shared interest in a game called World of Warcraft. Gavin was a really socially awkward guy in real life, although he was a cool dude to talk to online. He was also a genius with an IQ of around 180. He and Gavin visited each other's houses a lot after they became good friends, and they would just hang around, play World of Warcraft, watch videos on YouTube, or play chess. One day, the narrator decided to visit his friend uninvited, so he knocked on Gavin's door, and this older-looking guy opened it, who looked around 40. He had a little bit of grey hair and a beard. The narrator assumed this was Gavin's dad because they looked eerily similar, but then he remembered that Gavin didn't have a dad, so he was a relative, or so he thought. When he asked if Gavin was home, the stranger laughed and said he was Gavin. He found it weird, but could it be a coincidence, or Gavin was simply named by his uncle? So he told the older stranger that he was looking for the younger Gavin and described him to the guy. To the narrator's surprise, the stranger started looking uneasy. After some hesitation, he said Gavin was not home and told him when Gavin would be home. So the narrator went back to the time he was told, and sure enough, Gavin was home. He told Gavin about his encounter with his relative, but Gavin said he had no relative by that name. He also claimed to be at home while the narrator spoke to the older Gavin. Apparently, that was older Gavin from the future. Interestingly, Gavin went on to study quantum mechanics. 4 friends and a new dimension. This misadventure began when 4 friends were returning from Utah Rodeo in May of 1972. The group was driving down Utah Highway 56 on a dark, moonless night and eventually reached the Modena Railroad crossing landmark. 2 of the girls were reportedly sisters, the third girl was their first cousin, and the fourth one was a friend of one of the sisters. They were driving in a 1971 Chevrolet Nova, owned by the father of the sisters. They had taken the car to attend a very popular annual rodeo happening near Pioche, Nevada, about 180 miles northeast of Vegas. They came across a fork in the road and took left and passed through Gadianton Canyon. To their utmost surprise, the road changed to white cement after a while. They thought that they had taken the wrong turn, so they turned around. On their way back to the fork, they realized the scenery around them was entirely different. The desert had been replaced with lush green trees and fields. Then one of the girls suddenly screamed as she spotted a group of egg-shaped vehicles having 3 wheels and piercing lights started chasing them. They escaped the strange vehicle and returned to the desert. They had 3 flat tires and were compelled to stop. A state trooper picked them up the next day. He was having a hard time believing their story, but he found that the tire tracks of the girl's car had just stopped all of a sudden at one point. He couldn't see them going further. Was this where the doorway to a parallel universe swallowed their car? No one can say. And number 12 is a metal music fan that is stuck in the wrong universe. Sometimes an event jolts you into reality, or in the case of this young man, into an alternate reality. The event happened to be the death of a black metal musician named Euronymous. Here is basically what happened. A young Redditor says he is losing his mind and has never been so confused. He was shocked to learn that Euronymous had been dead for 20 years. Apparently, he was listening to music made by a much older person named Euronymous, but he was shocked to see a younger picture of the musician with RIP inscribed on it. At first, he thought it was a troll, but when he searched online, he realized his sense of timing had been distorted. He claimed he saw Euronymous about 2 months ago, apparently alive, full of life, and 20 years older. His favorite musician apparently also had a sold-out show, was helping Norwegian kids who had come to idolize him. However, in another universe, Euronymous was murdered by a man named Vikernes in 1993. Interestingly, the narrator claimed he couldn't log into his Earthscape account and no one was on Messenger, apparently referring to the old chatting platform owned by Microsoft. The narrator was on the verge of checking himself into a mental hospital, but we hope somebody is able to explain to him he might have fallen into a parallel universe. The Rose Woman. This bizarre incident was shared by a Redditor who was left astonished by a woman while he waited to catch a SkyTrain in an undisclosed city. He was around 15 minutes from his destination waiting at the station for the train. That's when he noticed a woman with glazed eyes requesting people to help her out with some money. She came up to the man and asked him if he could spare some money. She needed it for buying flowers for her brother who was in the hospital. The man thought it was just a ruse. Despite that, he gave her $5. According to him, he was convinced that she was lying about the roses for her brother. So then his train pulled up and he got on. From the glass, he saw her walking to others, asking them for money, probably reciting the same story. He arrived at his destination about 15 minutes later, and the man walked down to a bus stop. There was just one bus going where he was headed, so he hopped on and waited for the driver to finish reading his paper before the doors closed and they were on their way. However, 10 to 15 minutes later, the driver pulled up again for a routine stop, and the man was left shocked by what he saw next. The same woman who asked him for money at the train station got onto the bus holding a dozen roses in her hand. She looked at the man and walked straight on to take a seat. The man, however, was incredibly confused by this. He couldn't decipher how she got to a bus stop far from the station he got off at, and that too before him. She didn't only beat him there, but somehow also had the time to go to a store and buy the roses. How did she get there so fast? Was it a different version of her that got on the bus, or was it some kind of social experiment? Maybe she was a doppelganger. There have been other unfathomable accounts like that. A man during a trip to California with his wife recalled on the internet that they both saw a man who looked exactly like him. He had the exact same face. It was like looking into a mirror. Maybe his counterpart from a different dimension had wandered into this one. There's no way to tell. Have you ever experienced déjà vu before? We put it at number 14 as some people have tried to explain the phenomenon using the theory of parallel universes. Déjà vu happens many times. For example, you might feel you've had a particular conversation with a friend and the friend swears it never happened, or you go to a place for the first time but feel as if you have been there before. Some people have tried to explain it as your brain playing a trick on you because the brain receives information on one side before the other. Even though the difference is slight, it means one side of your brain processes info before the other, so sometimes the slight lag will make it appear you're experiencing something again, even though it is the first time. However, there is a parallel universe angle to it. Think of how radio operates. You can only listen to one frequency at a time because they operate at different wavelengths and levels. Parallel universes may work the same way. Since they vibrate at different frequencies, these universes could be all around you, but you don't take note. However, it is possible that sometimes two frequencies could sync or be in phase, and different universes would interact for a short time. Supporters of the theory believe that déjà vu may occur when universes are in sync for a short moment. While infinite universes may exist, they have a slight difference that makes them unique. This results in overlapping occurring between different universes, and you sometimes get flashbacks of a thing you did in the past in another universe while doing it for the first time in your current universe. Two mums. This story was also shared by a Redditor, and to say it caused a stir would be an understatement. Back in 2012, this woman was staying with her mother for the last few months of her pregnancy. Her mother would leave for work at around 7 in the morning and wake her up while she got ready. On the day it happened, they woke up and went about their routine. She saw her mother off, locked the door, and went to her mother's room to watch a TV show she usually watched every day after her mother left for work. But around 30 minutes later, she had to use the restroom, and while she was in there, she was scared out of her wits by her mum opening the door on her. The mother stared at her for a bit and then closed the door. She quickly got up, washed her hands within a few seconds, and went out to see her mother. However, she was nowhere to be seen. In the shortest interval of time, she appeared and disappeared. When the woman checked the main door, it was still locked and her mother's car wasn't in the driveway. She called her mother to see where she was and was baffled to hear her say that she had just pulled into work. The woman said that whenever she asks her mother about this incident, she doesn't say anything. In fact, she doesn't even remember what happened that day. That's quite an unsettling incident that would scare even the bravest of us. How was her mother on her way to work and at the bathroom door at the same time? It's physically impossible unless we accept that it was a glitch in the Matrix where two alternate realities had a sort of mix-up. The wrong husband. Multiverse enthusiasts think that it's possible for people in different places to phase between different parallel realities, and this story describes something exactly like that. A Reddit user named Aunt Masso told Reddit that she was newlywed. She and her husband had been married for barely 1.5 months when one day she woke up at around 5:30 a.m. Her husband was sound asleep beside her. She recalls seeing a notification on her phone. It was a text from Sam, her husband. She had sent a love heart to Sam around midnight, to which he had replied asking who it was. Only Sam was deep in sleep right next to her at midnight. Aunt Masso says she's a light sleeper and would have definitely woken up if he had gotten out of bed or turned his phone on. She thought her husband was just playing a cheeky joke, so she wrote back, "Who is this?" And just a few seconds later, she got a reply from her husband saying, "I asked you first." This spooked her out. After all, Sam was pressed against her right side, sound asleep. She looked at his nightstand to confirm that his phone was still there, and it was dark and silent. She again asked, "Seriously, who is this? Why are you coming up in my phone under one of my contact names?" The person on the other side asked what name they were under, to which she replied that maybe this was some sort of a crossed wires situation. The person on the other side then asked her whether she was in a particular town. To her surprise, it was the town that they lived in. They both established that both of them were in the same town. So the person further asked where she lived, as it might be a glitch in the system due to being in the vicinity. She, however, didn't want to give up her street address. She asked him if her number came up on his phone under someone else's name too. To this he answered that he found her among his contacts and didn't remember creating it. It was saved as Wi-Fi with a heart next to it. He was just curious to see who it was. He also told her that he lived on Violet Street. She was stunned to hear this, as her husband had saved her number as Wi-Fi but pronounced it as wifey, and no one beside them knew about this cute personal thing. Moreover, she lived on Violet Street too. She said that the writing style of the person on the other side was quite familiar. She confirmed again that her husband's phone was on the nightstand and he was still asleep. She thought that someone was pranking her, so she turned her phone off and fell asleep. The next morning, she discussed the episode with her husband, who had no recollection of the event, and there weren't any text messages on his phone. He texted her hi to check whether the Sam from last night was in fact her husband's number, and to their surprise, the message popped up just below the last text from her conversation with Sam. Many think this was an interdimensional communication, and the Sam she was talking to was from an alternative reality. Could this really happen though? Could the transmission waves from different dimensions get entangled? What do you think happened here? Tell us in the comments below.